Okay, hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webinar, Back to School Communications, Spotlight on Student Wellness. My name is Kevin Hogan. I am the Content Director for eSchool News, and I am happy to have you joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. This event is brought to you by School Status. School Status provides a comprehensive suite of data and communication solutions that enhance educator effectiveness, automate workflows, support professional development, and improve student outcomes by facilitating meaningful engagement between teachers, districts, and families. School Status products give educators instant insight into the information they need for data-driven decision-making, removing technology, language, and access barriers for school and home communications. With more than 200 million successful parent-teacher interactions, and millions of users across all product lines, School Status drives meaningful results for districts across the U.S. Now, before we get into our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the features of the platform that we're using. This event is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. If you have a question or comment for us, there is a chat function that you can use. Please use this. Also use it to contact someone from the eSchool News team if you have a technical question. But really, I know the panelists and I would love to have some interaction from folks who are watching. It really kind of helps drive the conversation. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our conversation and some introductions. First, Dr. Kara Stern. Kara is the School Status Head of Education Solutions, and she's been working with teachers in schools for more than 30 years as a teacher, principal, and nonprofit leader. She earned her PhD in teaching and learning from NYU and her master's in school leadership from Teachers College. She's on a mission to convince the world that school communication should be considered part of instruction. Also, we have Laura Baker. Laura is a former director of school services at Bastrop ISD in the great state of Texas. Laura Baker is an educator with over 14 years of experience, serving most recently as Director of Student Service for Bastrop. She's passionate about building systems of support that empower students to achieve success. So, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And my reporting during the past few years during the pandemic, one thing has become, painfully clear, really, that the idea of mental health and wellness for not only students, but also involving the faculty and the families at large, is an essential ingredient if you're going to have a successful education system. And a really, BP, I call it, before the pandemic, you would go to events and you would talk about these topics in kind of an esoteric sense, but also kind of sometimes felt as like a nice to have. March 2020 comes along and we are all thrust into this new strange world, and wellness just became front and center. So with that, and before we jump into our conversations here, I'd like to poll the audience here on a couple of things and where they see they are in the state of play when it comes to mental health. Chris, if you could launch the first poll. So question number 1. Which activity do you think is most essential when it comes to fostering student wellness? Sharing counseling resources, social emotional learning, parent-teacher collaboration, transparent communication, professional development? I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. I might have actually added in all of the above. I think we'll get into that during our conversation here. Well, I'll give you a few more seconds. The parent-teacher collaboration is something that I think really stuck out too when we all went remote, when every parent, including myself, became a teaching assistant, right? I've been writing about the subject matter for 15 years, and before 2020, I think I mentioned parents maybe 5 or 6 times. And now you see how essential that communication is in the development. So we'll see what kind of results we have here. And then I think there's a second poll question as well. Great. Yeah. Number 2, what is the biggest challenge you face in back to school communications? Parent engagement, educator engagement, language barriers, and collecting data. Again, all 4, are challenges, I know, going forward. And maybe, while we collect these results, Doctor, we'll start with you. Maybe you can kind of give us your point of view of these past 3 years, if it's even possible, as surreal as it's been.
You talking to me? You want to start with me? I think.
Yeah, sure.
Laura. I think I would love to start with Laura because I have been outside of a school building for the past 3 years. I was doing the homeschooling thing with my kids and working with teachers and trying to support teachers who were doing remote learning. But Laura was in the weeds. So please.
Let's get it. Yeah. Where were you when?
All right. Okay. So just to give our participants a little bit of context, as the Director of Student Services, I oversaw our social emotional learning curriculum and its implementation. And along with that came, student and teacher training, and then also reaching out to parents. And then additionally, I was also over attendance. So trying to help make that connection as to why I'm here today as part of our conversation. So Kevin, as you already mentioned, I think as we all know, COVID really impacted not just our students, but our adults in the educational system as well, and then even our families. And part of that, was the inconsistency with learning. When I reflect just even 1 to 2 years ago, when we started opening up our doors, coming off of the completely 100% remote learning platforms, we started out with welcoming back 25% of our students on each one of our campuses, then 50. So it was kind of a phase-in process. And then you have families that were also experiencing the loss of income that is carried over even into our current school year or upcoming school year. And then as we know, if we're educators, many of our students come from sometimes some challenging or difficult home life. So with them being home during that time, they were exposed probably to even more things than maybe what they would have if they were coming to school daily, because a lot of times school is our students' safe place.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we noticed within our district is, I don't know if it's the lack of socialization or being around others, but with our younger student population, so our pre-K and kinder grade bands, this last year. So I also oversaw our response to intervention on the behavioral and social emotional side for our students. And we recognized that we had an increase in referrals in those particular grade bands. And interesting enough, I might be jumping ahead, but those were also 2 of the grade levels, pre-K and kinder, that were contributing the most to low attendance or absenteeism. So that was one of the things that we had to work through and are currently working through. And then more at our secondary level, not to say we didn't see it at the elementary levels, but even increases in drug dependency. We had students that were hitting the vape during class time, so sitting in class, because I was also over discipline for our district as well. So that's kind of what we were seeing over the past couple of years. But really, I was with a group of people I worked with over the past several years just last night, and we all agreed that this last school year was probably one of the hardest. I think the year before last, 21-22, we discussed that, okay, we're coming out of COVID and this is post-COVID, but really the 22-23 school year, I believe, and then what I saw in my previous district or in Bastrop, was it probably was one of the most challenging overall.
Yeah. Does that resonate, Doctor, with what you've heard from around the country and the planet, really?
Yeah. Yes, from around the planet. And definitely, having had the opportunity to speak with teachers from all across the country and school leaders, I think that the past year was exceptionally difficult. And I think it was not just exceptionally difficult for the adults in the building. I think it was exceptionally difficult for students. For all the reasons that Laura mentioned. And I also think, it's not so great for kids to just be at home all day long, day in and day out. And it becomes a habit, and not socializing becomes a habit, and isolation becomes a habit. And breaking those habits are really difficult. And I think we have seen that in the incredible increase of absenteeism, even post-pandemic.
Yeah, you say post-pandemic, but I mean, just to your points there, we're still dealing with the lingering effects.
Right.
And so it's like, what are the tools that are there to help enable teachers and parents? And it's interesting. So we just had the results here from the two poll questions, which kind of reiterate the idea of the parent involvement, right? So poll number one question: which activity do you think is most essential when it comes to fostering student wellness? 42% parent-teacher collaboration. And then number two, what is the biggest challenge? 85% parent engagement. So that's a pretty good indicator of where we should go with this conversation. So Laura, maybe you can talk again. I mean, within the BP before pandemic context versus now. I mean, what were your circumstances? What were your communication strategies before, and how have they changed as a result of this event?
So I think pre-pandemic, we used more traditional platforms. That was either email or making phone calls or utilizing the tools within Google Suite where we could plug in our personal cell phone number, but it would give us a Google phone number. And so more of those traditional ways of communicating. Fast forward to 2019, spring of 2020, when the pandemic did hit, it was right around that time, really, when we started exploring school status. So we as a district, or Bastrop ISD, does use school status. But that spring of 2020, I remember clearly meeting with our high schools and with our high school administrators, our social workers, and some other high-risk areas like McKinney-Vento, where students who are experiencing homelessness. And we had spreadsheets of students that we had not heard from, that we hadn't made contact with. And so we kind of flew by the seat of our pants. Like, what do we do? Because it was difficult to conduct outreach, even sending our attendance officers to the homes, because we were in the midst of the pandemic. So what can we do? So we kind of divided and conquered, went through that spreadsheet, kind of old school style, and said, I'll take this student, you take that student. And we did. We started conducting that outreach. We talked about language barriers potentially being one of the hardest things to overcome. We have a large Spanish-speaking population. I don't speak Spanish. So that was also one of the things that we did, is we identified those families that maybe speak another language other than English. And if we had Spanish speakers, we would assign those students to them. Recently, and with school status, and that's one of the great things about school status, and I'm going to kind of plug you guys here for a little bit, is that ability to communicate with families that do speak other languages. So even me personally, being a director, I'm kind of more behind the scenes, or was behind the scenes, and maybe didn't interact with students and families as much as our teachers, but there were times where I definitely had to reach out to families for various reasons. And what I found very helpful, because I didn't have anyone that I could immediately contact within my office that was able to translate for me. So I relied on school status a lot to either send an email or even make or do text messages. And what school status does is they could send my text message translated into Spanish. And then when the parent received that, they would respond back in Spanish, but I would receive it in English. So I think post-pandemic, we're really reassessing again with Bastrop. Parent engagement historically has kind of been on the lower end, unfortunately, in our district. And so I can't really say low parent engagement or low parent-teacher collaboration had to do with the pandemic. But I think because of the pandemic, we've had to take a step back and reassess why is that, and maybe kind of do a root cause analysis as to, okay, we still had this barrier or concern before COVID, but how do we learn from that and how do we grow from that? And just recently, my department took over parent engagement. And so that's what we were doing is kind of looking at, okay, we utilize these resources or the traditional resources. How can we think outside the box? And I will say, based on, again, school status also provides data on how many school to home or school to family connections you've made. So it's great to be able to see that data in true time and maybe identify areas where we could do a little bit better. And one of the things that we noticed was we were relying, again, and nothing necessarily new, but on email or text messages. And there's something to be said about good old-fashioned phone calls and picking up the phone. And speaking from personal experience, when my son was in elementary, he's going to be a senior this year, I remember we got a call from his teacher introducing herself and saying how she was looking forward to having my son in her classroom. And that really set the tone and the stage for that school year. And it really does make a difference. So I think that's something that we need to rely on a little bit more. We talk about, as educators, when students are in our classrooms, a lot of times they're not engaged with us because they are on their phones. And we get frustrated and upset with that because they're texting or creating TikToks or whatever it might be. And so I think, again, as the adults, we need to model for them and again, kind of go back to the basics and pick up the phone and start making those phone calls to parents and families.
Yeah, that during the course of the pandemic and what I call kind of the great beta test for all education technologies, going into the forced remote learning and going back to whatever hybrid is, or going into those days, there was talk of like nothing ever going back to normal, and now there's talk about well, maybe we shouldn't go back to normal. Maybe some of these dynamics that we created through the use of these technologies that we can keep in place. Is that something, Doctor, that you experience? I mean, what are the things that we should just go back to normal, and what are the things that we should just keep on using?
Well, I think that in the past, and maybe not in the past, maybe also in the present, and sort of generally speaking, when people think about parent communication, they think about something that's happening after the teaching, and that is in reaction to something. Often something that is a behavioral incident that is negative, but sometimes for something good too. But it's the after. And one of the things that I've learned in the past few years is that there is a huge amount of research that supports that the more communication there is between teachers and parents or home adults, the more successful students are across the board. Their behavior, their attendance, their academic achievement, their graduation rates, their college acceptance rates, everything is improved when parent communication is consistent and positive and regular. And part of the reason is because it builds trust between the folks at home and the folks in the building. So as parents are communicating, as teachers are communicating and saying like, hey, we're working on this, and here's the assignment, here's when it's due, here are some resources, here's how you can help at home, here's some pictures of the classroom, so you get a sense of what it looks like. then parents are better able to support what's going on in the classroom, and they feel more trusting of what's happening at school. And that trust is really essential. There was a really interesting study that just came out. It was like, I don't know, Johns Hopkins and Harvard and wherever. So they came out with a study of the students who were the most successful in remote learning. Those were the students whose families had the highest level of trust in the school district. So it really makes a difference. So I would say that the way that school communication has increased exponentially in the past few years is something that we want to hold on to.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a tendency to back away from that as kids get older. So there's a little less in middle school, and then by high school, there's the assumption that students are really managing their own lives. They're responsible for managing their own work, and parents are really not part of the equation. But as it happens, the highest rates of chronic absenteeism are in high school. So it's actually a time to come closer, to pull parents closer, to keep them more connected.
Well, speaking of attendance, a question has come in from the audience, Laura, asking how the school status has increased attendance in your district. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And thank you, Stephen, for posting that question. I actually had some things written down for later on when we get to the tips portion, but I'm more than happy to speak to it now. So Bastrop ISD, where we were at, is for when I originally transitioned into the director role, which was in 2019-20, which was the pandemic year. Our focus or our priority at that time was discipline. When we came back 21-22, we were still focused on discipline. Attendance is always on the radar, but it was really the 22-23 or this last school year where attendance became our number one priority or our biggest initiative within the district. So part of my responsibility was going back to the drawing board. Like I said, what are we currently doing? What's working well? What's not working quite so well? What have we learned? And how can we grow from this? So we drafted, and part of this was soliciting feedback from various roles in our district. So campus social workers, our counselors, our administrators. We have what is called MTSS coaches in our district. So multi-tiered systems of support. So for us, that's PBIS, classroom management, RTI, SEL, and restorative practices. So we have coaches on each campus that help with that. We also solicited feedback from our attendance clerks, attendance officers, pretty much anybody who had their hands or played a role in attendance. So in trying to answer Stephen's question, how school status helped impact us in the area of attendance, was we, as a district, we really didn't have a declared platform that we were using to house or maintain attendance documentation for chronic absenteeism or truancy, parent outreach, those things. Each campus was kind of doing their own thing. And our student management system is Skyward. So what we did is we got with our attendance clerks because they were spending hours upon hours in drafting and printing out and stuffing envelopes for like the 3 or more excused or unexcused absence letters, the 5 or more, the 10 or more. And so what we started doing is we created a letter template, and I'm only using this as like one example, and I'll give some more later. But our attendance clerks started using these letter templates, and what they did is then they could upload those into Skyward and pre-populate the students' information, and then we would take those letters and link them into our communication with school status. And one of the other things that school status does for districts is not only translates from between languages, but it also maintains documentation for you. So running records, you can, as an administrator for school status, you can pull up a particular employee's or a family member's communication. And as well as it'll give you, I talked about making phone calls. School status will allow the educators or the classroom teacher, whomever it might be, they'll assign them a particular phone number. And so even if you're talking to the parent on the phone, it'll keep a record of that, and that's come in handy. But what our attendance clerks did is they took those letters that they were having to print out, stuff envelopes, and would send them via school status. So then not only did that save them a ton of time, which then they could devote to making some of those phone calls to some of our students who were experiencing chronic absenteeism or that had 3 consecutive absences and we needed someone to check in with them. But it also helped maintain some of our documentation. And not to say we're in a perfect place, or when I left that we're in a perfect place, but the feedback that we were getting from our campuses was, thank you so much. This is saving us so much time. And our attendance clerks are probably one of the most undervalued roles in our district. A lot of people talk about we get funded through our attendance, so we want our percentages to be much higher because then we receive much more funding. Well, who is the person who's primarily responsible for that and making sure our data is accurate and we are reporting to our state what our attendance is, and it's our attendance clerks. So freeing up some of that time for them to focus on other things was a huge, huge win for us. So Steve, I hope that answered your question in relation to being specific to attendance and positive results as it relates to school status. But again, as we carry on our conversation, I'll try to hit on some other things that we learned from within our district and that we implemented as part of our attendance initiative as well.
Well, great, Laura. While we have you on the hot seat here, another question coming in: does your district use a universal screener for behavior?
So we do, actually. Another plug. So a lot of partnering with other agencies or organizations. So several years ago, we recognized that we have intermediate schools within our district too. So we have our elementaries are pre-K through 4th, our intermediates are 5th through 6th, which going into this next school year, we're no longer going to have intermediates. We're going to go to a more traditional middle school model. And so our middle schools up until this point were 7th and 8th grade, and then traditional 9th grade campuses, 9th through 12th. So some of the things that we did was using the universal screener as far as behaviors is we partnered with an organization called Emergent Tree, and they actually provide a screener that is super easy for teachers to fill out. So they provide a rubric on how to assess the students, and they're based on the district's core values or the students' expectations, which were safe, respectful, responsible. And so that's what we used as far as our universal screener. But then in addition to that, we didn't solely rely on that screener. We also used maybe some anecdotal data. We would also pull in attendance data. But that universal behavior screener was a good place to start because, for one, your teachers are assessing. You can have, let's say you're at the secondary level, and the majority of my background is with secondary. So maybe you don't have just one teacher assessing that student. Maybe you pick your snapshot time teacher and then an afternoon or an electives teacher to also fill out the UBS or the universal behavior screener. But it gives you a starting point because it would weight the students as high risk, medium risk, low risk. And what we really did is usually our high risk students were already receiving the highest level of support that they could. And that was either through special education in our behavior programs or maybe behavior RTI. We tended to look at our middle risk students, maybe those kids that kind of fall in between, not necessarily on the radar. And so again, that's when we might start pulling in some of the attendance data, looking at discipline referrals more specifically to see what those areas of or concerns of behavior were. And so that's what we used, and it was very, very beneficial. And so again, that organization is called Emergent Tree, and they helped us with a lot of other things, but it was really a good starting point. And we also partner with Panorama Education, which also does student and teacher social emotional learning surveys for us that we also used in combination with attendance.
Right. Now, we talked about high school students and primary grade students. Doctor, are there different dynamics when communicating with parents as students get older through the K-12 experience? And are there different tools or different methods in which you are communicating with parents? But I think Laura was talking about some of their specific strategies, especially reaching out on the phone, to specific parents. Is that something that might be more effective to a kindergartner, say, than to someone who's maybe a junior in high school?
I don't think so. I think that there has to be a combination of communications, and that needs to be consistent all the way through. And part of it has to be kind of a family communication that's going home to everyone saying, this is what's going on in our classroom. This is what the students are working on. This is what it should look like. Here's how to contact me if you have any questions. And then I think there has to be a look at who's responding to those messages, who's reading them, who's opening them, who's seeing them, and then one-to-one follow-up with families or parents who aren't engaging. And, I think Laura spoke earlier about what a game changer it was for her to be able to communicate in Spanish without actually being a Spanish speaker. And I will say I have I'm on the other side of that as a parent, because the reason I don't work in a school building anymore is because a family job opportunity took us across the world. So now I live in another country where I don't speak the language, and I have 3 kids in school here. And, as far as I know, they could tell me there was no school. I would have no idea. They could tell me morning was canceled, and they would show me something on their phone, and it wouldn't mean anything to me. And so you might think from the outside, like, oh, wow, like that mom doesn't even care. Well, it's not that I don't care. It's that I don't know. And so if there was a system of outreach that I could access because it was translatable, I would be involved in my kids' education in a way that I'm not. And, it's ironic, right? I was a teacher. I was a principal. I was a head of school. I have a PhD in teaching and learning. I don't know anything about what's going on in my kids' school lives. And it's really because I can't access it because of a language barrier. Yeah. So a tool that allows you to communicate in a parent's spoken language at home, that's a student who's going to be supported to be at school.
Yeah. Now, maybe I'll channel some of our audience here who are educators, and they hear about giving parents a phone call or reaching out, and they say, well, I have 35 kids in my class, right? I mean, when am I going to do that? How am I going to do that? It's really this is where the technology can come in. Maybe we can talk about how these are technologies that aren't replacing teachers. They're making their jobs easier, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ability to send a text message and send it from a private number, it's hard to make a phone call. It's hard to receive a phone call. It's not hard to send a text. It's not hard to receive a text or to respond to a text. Also, I've been writing a lot about like AI recently, and I feel like that's one of those things where, you can be at a breaking point as a teacher all the time. And so here's this tool that you can turn to and say, like, hey, could you script me an email that I can send to this parent that will sound patient and explain for the 97th time, like, why this one thing is not okay in a way that they will understand. And, it's saved you time. It's saved you losing your temper. It's, maybe taught you some good communication skills, and it's making a better connection between parent and teacher.
Hey, that's pretty good. We made it about 35 minutes without mentioning AI. But it is true. It is true. It is a tool that is going to be something that enhances the teacher's experience, and you get to see it baked into school status technologies along with everything else, right?
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit about user behavior. So, I mean, have you seen that parents have a different attitude or have maybe more of an educated appreciation for the work of their faculty after these past few years? I mean, it is a two-way street, right? Laura, maybe you could talk about your experiences there.
It definitely is. I was nodding my head pretty vigorously. So we've seen positive results or experienced positive results. So one of the things that our district did is used like Blackboard and things like that. And we would send out like the nightly calls for attendance, or maybe in the afternoon to the parents, where it was like, your child was tardy or they didn't show up for second period today. And what we were seeing that was happening with that is our parents were not, they would either block those numbers or because I think they were getting inundated with just information, and it was just kind of like, here's another thing, and they would block it or ignore it, whatever the reason might be. One of the things that we saw with school status, though, and Kara, talked about this in her own experience, is I think because of the way that school status is set up, it is set up to truly be a communication platform, not just a notification platform, but a communication platform. So because it does allow that opportunity to translate into other languages, we saw that our parents were also interacting. So again, I talked about me being someone that was no longer a classroom teacher, which I once was. I was also a paraprofessional, so I get it. And when you have X amount of students in your class, it is hard to call every single parent. But again, I want to go back to because part of what we're talking about today is setting up ourselves and our students and our families for a successful school year. I do think that would be one tip or one strategy I would give you guys, is to make those phone calls before the start of school, because then that kind of sets the stage and the tone for the remainder of the school year. And if you start with a positive, it's much easier to kind of address those challenges or maybe those negatives later on. But again, our parents or families did receive our communication a lot better because I think they saw it as a valuable tool. And one of the things that I would say too is, as a district, because I don't know the different roles that we have sitting in our audience today, but if maybe you're with your district's communication department or you're an administrator, declare your communication platform for either your campus or your district. So that is something that we did at Bastrop ISD, as we said, school status is going to be our declared district communication platform for our students and our families, instead of Remind, or I'm trying to think of like Class Dojo, because I know a lot of us use Class Dojo because we can communicate with families. And so we would also make sure that our staff knew that, what our declared platform was, and then also train them in it. But then we also made sure that our parents knew that as well, that, hey, we're using this platform to send out the majority of our communication. And then one of the things that school status will do for you too, because I'm sure if you've been in education for some time, when you do have those conversations with parents and families, you ask, what form of communication do you prefer? Do you prefer a phone call? Do you prefer a text or an email? All of that can be set up within school status as well. So I would say overall it was positive for us. And because, again, it's not just a notification platform, but it was truly intended for a communication platform.
Yeah, the founding story is when the founder of school status was in high school, he was not always going to school, and he was with his mom shopping in the grocery store, or his mom was in the grocery store and ran into one of his teachers, and his teacher said, like, hey, Like, why isn't your kid coming to school? And so that sort of spurred him to think about what could you create, that exchange changed the trajectory of his life, because then his mom knew and made sure he went to school. And he wanted to think about what he could create for families and for schools that would stand for that level of communication. You can't count on running into someone at the grocery store. So what can you count on? You can count on a platform that's going to allow you to easily let parents know when their kid's not there.
Right, right. So, Doctor, talking about your data and talking about, tracking attendance versus parent-teacher communications, I'm going to guess that those with the most chronic attendance also might not have the best maybe relationship with their parents, or the family might be, that might be a symptom of something that is going on at the home. Are there extra strategies there in terms of building communication with, say, students and families who might be in crisis?
Absolutely. And I think that still the prevailing approach to dealing with chronic absenteeism is a truancy approach, a punitive approach. And I think there's a lot of support out there for understanding that a positive approach to building community is going to get more kids to want to show up. So one of the companies that's in the suite of the school status ecosphere is called School Innovations, and it's School SINA, School Innovations, and I'm blanking on the last word. Sorry, SINA. But what they do is they send these incredible, very positive attention awareness letters, physical letters in families' home languages to their homes. And they come periodically through the year, and they explain why it's important to be in school, what the positive outcomes and positive benefits are of being in school. And those, their data shows that they have this really high save rate of students just from getting those sort of positive letters that are explaining to families in a language they can read why they're School Innovations and Achievement. Thank you. I hate that when you lose a word in the middle of speaking to a whole bunch of people. And so that's really been incredible to see and read about and learn about. And I think that, often chronic absenteeism, it's not necessarily that it's a bad situation at home. It could be, it could be that there's been a bad situation at school, that either there's been a situation of bullying, or more often than not, there's this what they call school connectedness or belongingness, which is students' belief that someone at school actually cares that they're there. And if they don't feel like anyone cares that they're there, they're not coming to school. And so positive interventions in the form of either a positive attention awareness to attendance letter, or outreach from a teacher or an advisor or a homeroom teacher to a parent saying like, hey, we really miss Kevin when he's not here. We would like to see him in school every day. What can we do to help with this? Those kinds of things matter. That kind of positive communication makes a difference.
And it sounds to me that the strategies that you're both talking about are proactive versus reactive, right? And especially when it comes to truancy and chronic. So if you're ahead of it, maybe that prevents you from having to be in a negative environment.
Right, and that's my whole thing about communication, right? Is that communication shouldn't be reactive. It should be baked into what teachers are doing as part of their instruction plan, because it does impact student success so intensively.
Yeah. Now, another pandemic effect or another pandemic realization too, in my conversations has been that it goes beyond making sure that the student's okay. Do you see an increased responsibility, Laura, for the district to kind of inquire about the mental health of the family in general, or going out just beyond the kid?
Absolutely. So one of the things I didn't mention earlier about our own experience in Bastrop ISD is this last year, one of the things that we saw, and this is kind of, I'll bring it back to your question. One of the things that we saw in our district was the increase in our own faculty and staff struggling with mental health concerns. We actually had to do several crisis or suicidal screeners with our own staff members while they were at work. And so when you think about that, and you also think about our students and our families, if we're seeing it within our own faculty and staff during the school day, then what else is happening outside of our school walls? And, we know our students have been struggling either pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, during the pandemic. So it's been this domino effect. And, I would say absolutely, yes. And so we need to be thoughtful about response to intervention. It's key. We're experts in response to intervention when it comes to academics. But where we really need to focus in on is the social emotional well-being of our students and also their behavior, because our students aren't going to learn if they're not able to come in and be ready to learn. So I would say that, and then also, tying into our community resources, knowing what's out there, also making sure our campus level staff knows that. I'm kind of talking from a district level perspective. But one of the things that we recognized is, like in our district, we have over 12,000 students, and the state of Texas requires that we declare a McKinney-Vento liaison, which is for students experiencing homelessness. We have one person in our entire district, and so that managed all of that. And so what we did is we recognized that, and we said this needs to be more campus-driven, because earlier intervention means that we're able to identify more quickly and we're able to provide resources and supports. So to answer your question, yes, do we need to pay attention to that in our students and our families? Absolutely. And again, kind of bringing it back to that, our own staff as well. And some of the feedback that we got from our staff, we did an SEL cohort with teachers. And one of the things we did in elementary and secondary, and one of the things that they said is, we're tired of hearing about self-care, adult self-care. When you say that, I'm hearing that that's another thing that I'm having to add to my plate. So we had to get creative in thinking about, okay, what other term can we use instead of adult self-care, and how can we still incorporate this and implement it in our district without calling it that per se. So it might be the same thing for our students as well. We hear SEL, and there's a lot of controversy around SEL too. And so maybe we have to start getting more creative on how we have those discussions. And I feel like I'm kind of talking a lot, but right before that conversation, Karen, Kevin, you kind of hit on some things about when we are reaching out to our families. And Kara, I think you mentioned almost having a script. That's one of the things that we did as far as our campus calling teams for attendance, is we provided them a rough outline or a script that they could take and utilize that on their campuses, because some people, when they, pick up that phone call and the person on the other end answers, you may get a little bit nervous. So I feel like this was a way to kind of empower our own staff. Here's my starting point on how I can open that conversation. And one of the things that I'll say too is make sure that it's in a positive tone. we are also required in the state of Texas to send out a beginning of year superintendent letter about the importance of attendance and truancy laws. And so that can be very negative, so to speak, if you write it a certain way. And so we created a template using Attendance Matters, which is another website that has a lot of free resources and a lot of great information. But we took their template and made some adjustments to it. And one of the things that we really wanted to make sure is that it had a positive tone. It sounded more collaborative, like, hey, as a school, as a campus, we need your help. And here's how we can help you. And so within that letter, we did talk a little bit about truancy and what the laws were and the parents' responsibilities in that. But we also gave tips and strategies to the parents on how they could set their student up for success on having good attendance. And that's for all grade ranges. And then one of the other things too that we made sure that our campuses were including are, who are your campus point of contacts when it comes to attendance? Here's the attendance clerk point of contact. Your student's assigned administrator is this person. Your student's counselor is this person. And then maybe sometimes when they might need to reach out and how they need to reach out to the campus. So if you have a doctor's note, here's the person that you need to send that to. And then real quick, because I know we're getting close to running out of time, but one of the things that we did as well, going back to our attendance clerks, is because they had some free time. I don't want to say free time. We freed up some more time for them when we took away the stuffing of the envelopes. But what they did is they would run their reports, their attendance reports, and they might take their top 5 kids that had poor attendance and start conducting outreach to those families. And that might be during text message or through a text message. And we did give them a short, sweet little script. And it was something like, I tried to find it earlier. We've noticed that Kevin hasn't been in school. We're just checking in to make sure everything's okay. Is there anything that we can do to help on our end? And we had true responses that we got back from families, and it was a game changer for us. One of them might be, sorry, we had a death in the family, and so we had to leave, or we haven't been at school. So then our attendance clerk was able to go in to that student's attendance and reconcile it to be an excused absence as opposed to unexcused. Another was, I'm sorry, their sibling, we had to take them to the ER last night. We didn't get home till late, so I let them stay home to sleep. So again, our attendance clerk could go in and update or reconcile that attendance note. And then sometimes we even had one that was, I can't get my daughter to school. I don't know what's going on. And so the response back from the attendance clerk, I get goosebumps with this, was, would you like for me to make a referral to the counselor or the social worker? And the mom was, absolutely. And the attendance clerk said, and I'll also let her administrator know as well. And so they did. They made a referral to the counselor. And so it's an intervention. Again, we want to be proactive. So we want to educate parents on the importance of attendance. We want communication to not be punitive. Like Dr. Stern said, like it can become, that can cut off our ties with those families when we're coming in and saying we're having to refer you to truancy court. And not to say there's not a time and place for that, but if that's our first go-to, our results aren't going to be that great. And also we need to be connected with those families, because again, we might not know what's going on. And with that communication, we're going to get some insight into what is going on. How can we help you and your student be successful this school year?
Amazing, incredible amount of insight there, Laura. Thank you. And I knew the toughest part of my job this afternoon was going to be to end the conversation, and we are getting close to the top of the hour. But maybe, Doctor, I'll leave you with a few minutes to kind of to wrap up and give us some last words here on this hugely important topic.
Yeah, sure. There's so many things that I want to respond to also from what Laura shared, but I think just from the top, positive, consistent school-home communications at all age levels is a game changer. It's a game changer for students, and it's a game changer for parents, and ultimately it's a game changer for teachers, and it makes teachers and principals' lives better. And for the district when more kids are showing up. And so whether it's something like SINA's attention to attendance letters that are so positive and congratulatory letters, your child is in the top 1% of attendance, of attendees this year, congratulations, here's a certificate, those kinds of things really help students and parents to feel connected to what's happening at school and to show up. I wanted to just say something quickly about faculty wellness. And I got to school status by way of SMORE. SMORE is a platform for school newsletters. And so one of the things that I do is I create a lot of templates for school newsletters and write about them. And I think that it's one thing that principals can do to support their faculty is to also be sending a weekly communication to faculty. And part of what they can do in those communications is really call out teachers in their building and thank them and validate their work, and to do it publicly, because it's a very underappreciated field and job. And so for principals to say like, hey, I really just want to, like, here's my Hall of Fame for the week, like these 5 teachers, what an incredible job they're doing. Here's an example from each of their classrooms, like, way to go. That kind of thing similarly builds trust and connection.
Well, great. I do see that our time is just about up, so I'm going to wrap things up. I'd like to thank both Kara and Laura today for a really informative presentation and conversation. I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining in as well. Just lots of great comments and questions there. So as a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. Thanks again for participating, and have a great day. Thanks.